In this video, we're going to talk about how the schwa family of sounds gets produced by native speakers. We'll talk about how to go about teaching this to our students. Depending on the variety of English you speak, there are either 3 members of the schwa family or 4 members. So all varieties of English have the first 3, the schwa, the shui and the shwu, particularly British English, Australian English, for example. If you speak a rhotic variety of English, that's one where a written R letter at the end of a syllable has an effect on the sound of the syllable. If you speak a rhotic variety of English, then there's a 4th member of the schwa family, which is the schwur. And a schwur is like a schwa, but it has an R colouring to it. And it gets sounded wherever you see an R in the writing. That syllable would be a schwa in British English, for example, but will come out as a schwur in American English. Phoneticians actually make even finer distinctions than this. Within the family of weak sounds, they, for example, will distinguish between a weak I sound and the so-called happy vowel, the sound which appears at the end of the word happy. But for practical teaching purposes, we think that the 3 distinctions we make between schwa, shui and shwu are sufficient, and of course we have to add a 4th one for rhotic speakers of rhotic varieties of English, and that's the schwur. So a schwa you all know about. A shui is any weak or reduced E-type sound. A shwu is any weak or reduced U-type sound, and the schwur is the R-coloured version of schwa. There are 2 characteristics which all members of the schwa family share. The first is that the exact quality of the sound involved is not terribly important. It can be quite indistinct. The second is that syllables with schwa in them are never produced as stressed syllables. There's never a breath pulse on that particular syllable. Instead, they're produced in syllables which are before the breath pulse itself, or are produced on the remnants of a breath pulse. So in the examples we've got here, in the word about, the first syllable of about, the schwa there, is produced on the build-up to the breath pulse. And then in the other 2 words, the syllables containing the schwa sounds are produced in the aftermath, on the remnants of the breath pulse. So what's the function of these reduced sounds? Well, they create extra syllables. When you have a schwa sound between 2 consonants, or at the end of a consonant, or after a consonant rather, it creates another syllable. But it does this at minimum cost to the speaker. The speaker need make very little effort in terms of his speech-breathing apparatus in order to create another syllable if that syllable contains one of the schwa family of sounds. The best analysis of the schwa family of sounds that we've come across was made by the phonetician J.C. Catford. He distinguished the schwa-type sounds which you get before consonants, so for example in the words contain, taken, about, and when you get schwa-type sounds at the end of words before pauses or before vowels, comma, or radio, the E sound in radio, the second syllable of radio. Let's start with the first of these, when schwa family sounds appear before consonants. Catford said if you take 2 consonants and you look at the transition between the first consonant and the second one, we can see that 3 possible things can happen. The first is that there might be a full vowel between those 2 consonants. So if we take the word Paul, we have a P and an L at the start and the finish, and a full vowel or in the middle, and we end up with the word Paul. Very straightforward. This is how most languages make use of consonants and vowels. A second possibility is when you get the 2 consonants overlapping in their articulation. So if you take the word plight, the articulation of the P and L in this case get intermingled. The P is still being articulated while the speaker starts to articulate the L. And the result is the 2 get fused together in some way, and you get a word plight, which is just a single syllable. However, there's a third possibility, which Catford called an open transition. So it's a transition between P and L, but in this case it's got an opening. He called the one I just described, plight, a close transition, because there's basically no gap between the P and the L, their articulations overlap. But in an open articulation, what he says is that the articulation of the P is completed, and only then does the speaker start articulating the L. Now the result of this is that some incidental sound is produced. As the articulation of the P finishes, there's a little bit of incidental sound, and then the articulation of the L starts. And that little incidental sound, which is not produced consciously, it doesn't have to be produced actively by the speaker, but that little incidental sound creates a syllable after the P. So if we take the word polite, it's a 2-syllable word, but all I've done is to say the P, allowed my articulation of the P to finish, and then I start saying light, so polite. What I haven't done is actively inserted a reduced vowel or a full vowel, or done anything active, in fact, in terms of inserting things between the 2 letters, the P and the L. But because I finished the P articulation before starting the L one, a sound appeared and the extra syllable was created. Now we've got a chance for you to experiment yourself with this. We've got 2 columns of words. The left-hand column consists of a series of words where there are close transitions between 2 consonants. So that's the second of the categories I've described earlier. In them, the articulation of the first consonant overlaps with the articulation of the second consonant. and as a result you just get a single syllable in many cases. On the right-hand side you get the same consonants, but this time with open transitions between them. So you have to finish the articulation of the first consonant before starting the second one, and the incidental sound that you hear between the two will create another syllable within each of these words. So now would be a good moment to pause the recording, try this out for yourself and see what the results are. There's a second way that Catford discovered that schwa family type sounds get produced by speakers. This is when either the schwa family sound is at the end of a word, or alternatively it's when it's before a vowel. It's the second syllable of radio, has a schwi in it. To produce these type of schwa family sounds, what the speaker does is to do the minimum necessary to create a syllable, but no more than that. So again, it's always produced either on the build-up to a stressed pulse or on the remnants of a stressed pulse. But the speaker does the minimum necessary with this minimal amount of energy just to make sure that another syllable is audible. Here are some words which you can use to practice this. The first column has words of a single syllable, where of course you'll be saying them with a breath pulse, with a movement of the abdominal muscles, a push there to create a stressed syllable. Now don't do any more than that when you say the words in the second column, and on the remnants of that push, of that abdominal gesture, make the second syllable so that it's hearable. The listener has to be able to identify it as being a second syllable, but no extra effort is being made on the words in the second column as compared to the words in the first column. One effect of this which you'll notice is that there's a slight shortening of the length of the vowel in the words in the second column, the length of the stressed vowel, I should say, in the words in the second column. This is because you only have a certain amount of energy to expend on each of these words, and if part of that energy is being used for the very final syllable, even if it's a minimal part, then there's a little bit less available for the first syllable. So you'll notice that the timing of the first syllable will change. Your job is to see how this works at the level of the abdominal muscles, what it sounds like to be doing it with conscious pushes of your abdominal musculature, and trying to produce the minimum sound necessary to produce the extra syllable at the end of the words in the second column. If we look at the phrase bananas and cream, we see that it has 5 syllables, and 3 of them would conventionally be considered to contain schwas. Now, under the analysis which Catford made, these all contain open transitions between the consonants which flank the so-called schwa sounds in the middle. These open transitions are very different from normal vowels. They're shorter in length, they're much less distinct, sometimes they're not even voiced. The incidental sound which you get in the middle isn't even a voiced sound. So the fact that these open transitions, although they're called schwas, are very indistinct, very short, very unclear, creates a problem when you try to teach them using any listen first type approach. So either listen and repeat, or in fact any approach where you start off by giving the students a recording and you try to get them to copy what they hear on the recording. They won't hear the schwas if their language doesn't use schwa in the same way as English does, and in order to get over that, one ends up pointing them out, exaggerating them, and suddenly the essential quality of a schwa, the fact that it's a minimal sound necessary to create a syllable, is lost. We take an articulatory approach, and what we recommend is that you teach the actions which underlie any aspect of English pronunciation, and then the sound will come out all right automatically as a result of the students doing the right things. This is the first of Catford's 2 categories of schwa-type sounds. The way that you move from the words on the first column to the words in the second column is that you create an open transition between 2 of the consonants. And to do that, all you have to do is just finish the articulation of the first consonant before you start the articulation of the second one. One way to teach this is to demonstrate to students that they already know how to make this type of open transition. Or they can almost certainly do it in their own language when they stutter. So if you take a stutter, you're basically making a sound repeatedly, and then you're going on and moving on into a word. So for example, you might go boot or foot. If you start by doing that, you'll notice that you're not trying to make any sound between the consonants which you're stuttering, but an incidental sound does appear. And this is exactly the same process as happens in English. Here's an example of how you can make use of this, get your students to produce phrases in English which are pronounced perfectly, exactly the same way as native speakers produce them. We've got a question. What's the time? And with the clock, we've got a clock as shown. And the way to get students to produce the right answer is to start back chaining. So start with the final word in the sentence, to, and then add a couple of stutters before that, to. Take another stressed syllable in the phrase, quar, and add a schwa before that, a quar. Put these 2 elements together and you get a quar, to. If we add on its at the start, we get its, a quar, to. And if we speed it up a little bit and get rid of the pauses between those 3 elements, we get it's a quarter to 2, which of course is exactly the way that a native speaker of English would pronounce it. Now, that was a case where a true stutter on a single letter would give us the result which was needed. However, there are often cases where an open transition goes from one consonant to a different consonant. The activity is still a stutter-like transition. So to get your students practice with this, take a series of words like the ones we've got on the screen and just practice making stuttering tight transitions between the two consonants before saying the word itself. If we take the word at the top of the list, polite, the way to work with that would be to go pl, 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 as if you were stuttering between a P and an L. And then when one is happy with the fact that it's just a straight pl, finishing the P before starting the L, one can add in the rest of the word with, of course, a stress pulse on the second syllable. So you get pl, pl, polite, and the word will come out as it should do. If we take another example further on down, we can get, if we take the, for example, nautical, we can go tk, 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 and then put it into the word itself, nautical, nautical. The best way we found to teach Catford's first category of schwa family sounds, the open transitions, is using true stuttering or stuttering type transitions between two consonant sounds. However, even doing this, your students may be producing schwas with too much prominence, because of course in their language, in their first language, it's very possible that there's no equivalent to a reduced vowel, and they have the expectation that if there's going to be a syllable there, there should be something more substantial than either an open transition or the very reduced type of schwa we've just been talking about. If that's the case, you can make use of the practice cycle by using whisper and loud whisper. The students will be making so much effort on the stressed syllables that the unstressed syllables will more naturally fade into the background. So start off by saying a phrase with a normal voice, then getting them to say it with a whisper and a loud whisper, making sure that when they make the stressed syllables there's a good strong abdominal push. When they're doing that, the relationship between the stressed syllables and the unstressed syllables is likely to be much more authentic than it was originally. And if they keep the same respiratory system actions when they go from loud whisper back to normal voice, if they keep the same balance of effort between the stressed syllables and the unstressed syllables as they were making during loud whisper, then almost certainly their unstressed syllables, the ones with schwa, shwi, shwu, and schwa, will start coming out more authentic. And you can confirm to them that native speakers really do speak this way. This really is how English sounds.